Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Culture at the Castle, presented by the Richard Harris International Film Festival in association with the Limerick Writers' Centre and Bear Spot 2017. We're very honoured and privileged to have Billy O'Reilly, a great friend of the late Richard Harris and his family, and Billy will read a poem by Richard. Billy O'Reilly. We'll get to that.
It's quite an honour to be here with the Limerick Writers and to be in Limerick, my second home. I was fortunate to be involved with, as we say, Dickie Harris on a scholarship fund, and I know the family well. Very colourful guy who loves Limerick. Before I read a short poignant poem, I'd like to tell just a quick little story of the kind of man that Dickie Harris was. There are a million stories, you probably heard a lot of them, but one evening the telephone rings and it's 4 o'clock in the morning. So if you get a telephone call at 4 o'clock in the morning, it's usually bad news or an emergency or something that you don't want to think about. So I picked up the telephone and I said, "Who is this?" And the voice gets on and said, Billy, it's Richard, Billy. I said, "Okay, well, what's the matter?" And Richard says, "Nothing much, but I want you tomorrow night, Mcnamara's in New York City. There's a match between Wales and France. I want you there." I said, "Dickie, do you realize it's 4 o'clock in the morning?" And he says, "Well, you know, Bill, I couldn't sleep. Why the hell should you?" And hung the phone up. That's the guy. But anyway, this is a poem that Richard wrote in 1970 called "Time Flies." I'd like to read it to you. Time flies. It flies timelessly into a page of nothingness. Strangers touch with touching hands, touchingly, a deep meeting, fleeting time disentangles gentleness. Pushing fingers into memory, nothing will remain. Only the warm planted wildflowers of impression, a glow in winter, a love song sung in the palm, reflections of a distant future, mirrored in today's yesterday. Time washes, nothing's removed. It only dries the fingertip tears that smears the ripe departure. The wild and free running of joy gives birth to the girl boy of the future. Running still in timeless days when hands are empty and fingers reach out from moving doors and pane windows, unreciprocated, where the frost in the heart thaws in the old age of memory's house. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bill O'Reilly.
Thank you.
Before we go any further, I'd like to make the observation that we're very grateful to King John's Castle, who are supplying the coffee here today, and Treaty Brewery are supplying the toxins in bottle form. Beer to you folk. Now, the Mysterious Mr Valentine is a jazz duo, guitar and vocals, and they comprise of Rory Keane and Bridget Burhen, and play a mix of old classic jazz standards and contemporary songs. Rory Keane has played guitar since his late teens, concentrating on jazz over the last 10 years. Since moving to the Midwest, he has played regularly with the Limerick Jazz Workshop, drawing inspiration and learning from the workshop tutors and all the musicians he has had an opportunity to play with. Bridget Burhen has, for the last 20 years, sung with many different ensembles and choirs, ranging from gospel to folk to soul, jazz and blues. She was part of the Limerick Jazz Workshop and has also attended the Jazz Summer School in France for a number of years, being inspired and taught by fabulous jazz singer and tutor Leanne Carroll, England. The Mysterious Mr Valentine.
Thank you very much, Mary.
No one to talk with, all by myself. No one to walk with, but I'm happier on the shelf, misbehaving. I'm saving my love for you. I know for certain the one I love. I'm through with flirting, it's just you I'm thinking of. Ain't misbehaving, I'm saving my love for you. Like Jack Horner in that corner, don't go nowhere. Why do I care? Your kisses are worth waiting for me. I don't say idly, don't get go. I'm home about 8, it's just me and my radio and misbehaving. I'm saving my love for you. Like Jack Horner in that corner, don't go nowhere. What do I care? Your kisses are worth waiting for me. I don't stay out late, don't gotta go. I'm home about 8, just me and my radio. Misbehaving, I'm saving my love for you. Oh baby, I'm saving my love for you. Baby.
That was the Mysterious Mr Valentine. And now, from Stanzas Poetry Collective, we have Paul Mcnamara.
Hello everybody. Just want to say thanks a million to Shane and Dominic, the Writer Centre, and to the Richard Harris Festival for having us here today. And the last time I was working in King John's Castle, I was helping out with a photo shoot for a pantomime. And we weren't really sure what we were doing before we came along, and myself and my friend showed up. And we got there, we were kind of excited to see what we'd be doing, and we were told we were going to be the pantomime cow for the photo shoot. And we very quickly found out it's not a very fun job being a cow. But we had a moment where we turned to each other, and my friend, being a little bit, thinking a bit faster than I did, said, "Dibs on being the head." So, but then we got our costume, and it turned out my friend, his head was too big to fit in the front of the cow. So for once in my life, I was very happy to have a very big-headed friend, because I got to be the front. But I say, like, I was honoured again to be brought here today, and like, I must say, I think sacrilegiously, up until recently I hadn't seen an awful lot of Richard Harris's films, but thankfully, given this opportunity, and we got the opportunity to write 2 poems based on 2 of his movies, I was like, I need to fix this. So the first one I ended up watching and inspiring this poem was The Field, which again, very, I think it's, on par with murdering someone in Ireland if you haven't seen The Field. But, I sat down and I watched it and I realised something. Richard Harris was an incredible actor. And obviously all of you knew this already, but oh my, I could watch that man act, I think, all day. And I watched more of his films even outside of these poems afterwards. He's such a presence on stage, on camera. So I have two poems for you today. One kind of quieter one and then one a bit more crazy, which I think will mirror his roles in these films. So the first poem is called The Field. It was my kingdom, all I held dear, The grassy plain stretched for miles and miles, my statuesque soldiers in green defended every exit. Yellow toy trucks zoomed around the muddy construction sites. The bull from the neighbouring land and the bird that appears all watch, in the awe of the vastness of all we owned. We made wolf calls to scare them off, and our strong walls meant they'd never dare cross our border. When the land was young it was barren, no soldiers, no construction, no fun. But I grew it, I gave it life. In all of my 10 years, I gave it everything. The field was alive then, the field was green then, the field was Irish then, the field was mine, the field was me. Thank you very much. So, when we were talking about this, we had a group of 4 of us kind of discussing the stanzas, what poems we do, and we were kind of putting out loads of titles off the films. And Ileana, I think down below, put in an extra couple titles, like some of these might sound fun, some different movies. And one of the ones she mentioned was a film called Wrestling Ernest Hemingway, if any of you have seen it. And I kind of thinking, my first response was just, that would be a fantastic name for a poem. And I watched it, and I watched The Field and Wrestling Ernest Hemingway in the same day. And both incredible movies, but Richard Harris is barely recognisable between the two of them. He's such a different character. When you have The Field, he has that kind of very reserved, kind of powerful form, and then this just kind of free-flowing kind of energy in Wrestling Ernest Hemingway. So this poem is aptly titled Wrestling Ernest Hemingway, and one we might be able to have a little bit of fun with. So, actually, this poem is about Ernest Hemingway in a wrestling match with Richard Harris. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Richard Harris International Film Festival Mania! Our main event tonight pits the manliest Nobel Prize winner of all time, Ernest Hemingway, against the hero of Limerick, former 2-time Academy Award contender, Richard Harris. A grudge match of the highest degree, the man nicknamed Horse is looking to plough through the competition here tonight. Richard is the young underdog, the blonde-headed champ, Hemingway the grizzled veteran. Harris looks like an emperor, Hemingway more like an old man, you see. Will it be Harris or Hemingway? Glory will be for the victor, but for whom? The bell tolls and the match begins. The fight is even, both men get hits in. Hemingway's offense is methodical, no move is wasted. Harris is as charismatic as ever, playing to the cameras. Harris has been preparing for this for years. He was always athletic, always lived a sporting life. Harris gets caught multiple times, but gets out, as if by magic. Hemingway gains control and beats on Harris. He tells him to stay down, but Harris gets up again and looks Hemingway in the eyes and dares him to hit him as he laughs. Go on, try it with me, he roars defiantly and starts a comeback as the crowd pops and... Turn page. The noise in the arena builds and builds. Harris is looking for the ending now. The farewell of Hemingway is coming as Harris targets the arms as he locks in the Camelot clutch. Hemingway struggles, but the hold is unforgiving, and Hemingway taps. Harris has done it, he's won it, and Irish eyes are smiling. What a night, what a career for Richard Harris. What could be next after this? None of the field of contenders could live up to him. Not after this match, not after today. The man from Limerick is going to be remembered forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul Mcnamara from Stanzas. Bob Quinn is an Irish filmmaker, writer and photographer. He directed the 1977 Irish drama film Putteen, starring Neil Tobin and Donald McCann, set in Connemara, County Galway. One of his most acclaimed films to date is Budawani, which was made in '87 with the assistance of the Irish Film Board. Quinn adapted the script from a book by Padraig Standoon, Soul Lebrec. In 2001, he was given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Irish Film Institute. He has written and self-published Aristophanes' Apple, which Quinn describes as a story of peril, philosophy and love. It's based on in a not too distant future, when ice caps are vanishing, coastal cities are drowning, and a tipping point has been passed. Bob Quinn.
The name has been changed. I'm glad Paul mentioned This Sporting Life, my favourite film of all, Richard Harris. The next ones as well, but I won't tell you what I did on it. It was not good. Anyway, Tom mentioned Aristophanes' Apple. It's a novel I've been working on for the past 3 years, really. And I meet the editor tomorrow for about the 50th time. She's telling me where I'm going wrong, and I'm not to correct it all. So it's a work in progress. I mean, I finished it 4 times, but I still have to do it. Here's a bit of it, anyway. There are 3 characters. One is Flannery. He's an ex-advertising executive, about 40. There's a woman named Celia, who is French, and who has lived on an island in the middle of Lough Derg with a farmer philosopher who has stomach cancer, or lung cancer, but he pretends it's an ulcer. And here we go. Does any man dream that a gale can fear of 1,000 deeds that have learned but one? The Shannon swept onward, broad and clear, between the dumpity-dum. Flannery forgets the rest of the Doggerel, stretches, feels the dampness of his bunk, and reviews his survival strategies. On this morning, a gentle bump on the hole is his wake-up call. I spy with my little eye something beginning with C. Opens the cabin curtain a chink, reveals the belly of a bloated cow rocking like tumbleweed past his window. C for cow. Flannery has guessed correctly. He bets on sure things, but will take a chance on anything. Climbing spiders, scuttling woodlice, 2 blades of grass competing in the current. It keeps the mind active. Pulling the curtain wider reveals the slow procession of compacted waste, soiled nappies, empty fertilizer sacks. No change there. The watery sun is burning off the ethereal grey, revealing the breadth of the river stretching as far as I can see, its original course now defined by treetops. In its own way, it's pretty. Bath time for the planet, getting the scrubbing it deserves. His practiced eye zooms out to survey the vista. Green nose, maroon, pylons abbreviated, cottages mirrored, cattle mystified. Nearer his window, a family of swan moves as if in a dream. Recently, Flannery has experienced a blurring of the line between sleeping and waking. He drops the curtain, fumbles for the ancient iPod and his daily reassurance. A bright pinpoint emerges from the little screen, expands up and bursts like a beehive, expels 1 billion angry particles that scatter, form and reform, swarm as clouds in every direction, coalesce into neat bundles of matter trailing bright tails of neon, shooting out beams red as fire, green as ice, blue as tears, expanding in widescreen and finally contracting into a ballet of multicolored boxes dancing to a Strauss polka, from which emerges the sonorous voiceover, "Forget the Big Bang, drink Halper's tea, the brew that soothes." One of my best, Flannery murmurs, every frame a Rembrandt, and powering off to save battery, utters the confident motto by which he once lived: consumer demand leads to economic growth. A sense of humor doesn't hurt. It's tempting to go back to sleep, but there's no rest for the survivor. Rise and shine, Sir Flannery. He clatters out on deck, simulating normality, filling the silence with raucous song. I get weary and sick of trying, I'm tired of living and scared of dying, but old man River, he just keeps rolling along. A brazen magpie spies on him from its treetop perch alongside the boat. witnessing his self-deception, assessing tidbit possibilities. He reads its mind, shouts, "Feck off, feathered caliban, get your own grub, one for sorrow." Shoo! His minor stutter emerges only when he is discombobulated. Discombobulated. The magpie is unmoved until Flannery puts the cup down and claps his hands in a convincing gunshot. The bird cackles away, joins her partner to forage in the flotsam. Thieving magpie is right, two for joy, my foot, says Flannery, panicking a little, retreating, steadying up again, no regrets, clap hands and dance, twice around the galley and mind the paranoia. When nobody has a quick fix, it's all about resilience. Every man for himself, and the man of the hour is Flannery. He learned the hard way that civilization is a veneer. At base, there is only uncertainty, leading to suspicion, fear, road rage, violence, murder, neighbor against neighbor, tribe against tribe, the weak drowned, women and children first, especially his own. It's a jungle. Get out while you can. At least he had the foresight to move his boat inland from the Ringsend Basin. Nothing to lose anymore. He was right to make a run for it. Grief superfluous. It took him weeks on what was once the Grand Canal to reach the junction with the Shannon, toss a coin to decide a direction, north or south. Yawning, he pulls on damp clothes, recovers his chutzpah. Never say die. At least he has a purpose. Let's call it a date. I have a date, he says to the windscreen. And what about the faded words on the prow of his boat? Noli me tangere. That defiant slogan no longer applies to him. He has a longing to touch and be touched. Survival. Lone sailors are susceptible to fantasy. He remembers one of them, named Crowhurst, who cheated in a solo round-the-world race, never actually left the Atlantic until he ended up drifting off South America, writing reams of psychotic nonsense until he jumped overboard, never to be found again. Flannery can empathize with that, but the ice in his brain tells him dramatic gestures are useless. He intends to survive. Go with the flow of the swollen river. Adapt is the key to survival. He can fit into any circumstance or company, animal, vegetable, or mineral. He compares himself to a prisoner in solitary confinement who can befriend fleas, treat rats as soulmates, find lice loyal, provoke altercations with jailers just for a little human contact. He admits to missing human company and wonders if anybody will be left to mark his absence. Outside, the sun is finally peeping through the mist, inspecting its bedraggled progeny. He turns the ignition key, listens as the diesel engine clears its throat and coughs to life, its vibrations causing the geranium to shiver on the dashboard. Someday the engine won't start and there will be silence. In the meantime, he really must decide, directly south to Loughdare, where Celia may still survive, or north as far as Athlone, and the possibility of a pit stop. Why not? There must be a surviving mark where he could get a peace offering for Celia. He scans the horizon. Every picture demands a foreground. He makes a rectangle with his index fingers and thumb, squints through the windscreen over the water, shiny as metal, reflecting the patches of blue in the sky, tiny atolls, sideways figures fitted into a child's painting, a house defying gravity, a distant dog howling, a tiny canoe paddled by ants, a few stick people doing headstands, a child's pink dress floating by. It's futile to low the river, but Flannery now does so. Some nights he keeps himself awake by imagining his own funeral. He should keep imponderables at bay, avoid maudlin thoughts, but chugging over water is conducive to questioning, wondering, and guilt. At least he had kept in touch with the twins, entertained them every second weekend, spoiled them in the way of absentee founders. Of course, he answered their childish questions about climate change. He made up a simple riddle so that they could understand the unpredictable weather, why it rained more often here while poor people were dying of thirst elsewhere. Where it is wet, it is very, very wet, and where it is dry, it is arid. And the children would repeat that. The kids chanted it on their excursions to see the novelty of regular floods in downtown Dublin. Visitors to the old Viking settlements had to splash through puddles. The preserved skeletons in St. Michael's were submerged and had to be removed to a drier place in the Dublin mountains. Sales of rubber Wellingtons boomed, especially in Clontarf and Ringsend, where the old trade of ferryman was revived. But Flannery was not with them on that sunny Sunday morning. They were with their mother, among the hundreds of sightseers in Christchurch Place, fascinated by the novelty of once-in-a-lifetime flood, an unusually high tide, the swollen Liffey reaching up Wine Tavern Street, nibbling at the cathedral's foundations, lapping the doors of the civic offices. Even after months of rain and all traffic diverted from the Liffey quays, not even their mother had time to drag them away from the danger. No one had expected the surge to be so sudden, so merciless, so coldly and silently captured on CCTV, so cruelly displayed on YouTube. For days, Flannery searched desperately into temporary mortuaries, but never found the two small bodies among the hundreds. He wished he had been swept away too. One day, having conducted another despairing search, this time in one of the new mortuaries in the Guinness Visitor Centre in James Street, he saw a drunk staggering under the weight of a sandwich board. The banality of this primitive advertising disturbed him. How could there be business as usual when his personal world was shattered? There was something indecent about it. He paused to read the text. The end of the world is nigh, repent. Normally he would have sneered at the poor fool and passed on, but he took it personally. This was grotesque. How dare the man? Flannery ran up the board, smashed it and its innocent wearer to the ground, and continued to kick the board, trying to stamp the message into oblivion. Two Gardaí pulled him away, held him until he calmed down. He explained his loss, apologised to the sandwich board man, babbled that he was distracted searching for his kids, that all he wanted was to find them, take them up to Mount Venus in the Dublin mountains and watch the Strumpet City drown, dressing it up in a funny story maybe, somehow reassuring the twins. When he wept, the Gardaí let him go. No charges would be pressed. They had become accustomed to distraught lunatics, knew that neither they, the army, the government, or all the king's horses could put Humpty Dumpty Flannery's world together again. The floods were vindicating the man with the sandwich board, and the waters did not recede. Now it goes on. Flannery finds Celia on the island. Shanks, who is the third person, the farmer philosopher, persuades her to go with him on his boat to reach the sea, where he says you'll be safe from the next tsunami, which is true. You can't see, the tsunami doesn't bother you. So they traverse Loch Derg. They exchange Flannery's cruiser for a sailboat, which has been abandoned in the trees. And they get through Ireland Crusher to finally reach Limerick. It was twilight when they reached the railway bridge that once soared over the river. The boat passed under it with only a metre to spare. Flannery, guided by the top halves of approaching buildings, guessed where the old navigation channel must be, left the main river and anchored in midstream at the entrance to the drowning city of Limerick. He cut the engine and dropped anchor. They listened. There was no traffic, no sound of inhabitants. It's eerie, Celia said. Flannery explained. The truth is, there's probably only work for Gardaí, firemen, doctors, disposing of the dead. That's why we'll stay in the middle of the river. It's safer. Celia peered into the approaching darkness and gave a little shudder. He said, not to worry. We'll do a bit of foraging in the morning. We might be lucky. She retreated to the cabin. Flannery stayed on deck for a while, checked the anchor chain carefully, had a look around, then followed her. He paused at the door of the cabin. By the light of the solitary candle, he saw that she had taken the tin mattresses from the bunks, laid them together on the floor. She was covered with one blanket that revealed her neck and shoulders. And there follows a very nice scene, which I don't want to read. When they rose in the morning, they replaced the mattresses before emerging to greet the day. The boat was surrounded by mist, the silence oppressive. What is it? He noticed Celia cocking an ear. There's somebody awake. The noise of an outboard engine grew louder. Celia reached for the rifle as an inflatable rib emerged slowly from the mist, pulled alongside, and the old man, still wearing his broad-brimmed hat, a string holding it under his chin, threw a rope across the Flannery. I don't believe it, Shanks! How the hell did you get here? I'm a bloodhound. How do you think? Damn it, I'm stiff. These old bones can't take it anymore. Give us a hand. Together they reached out, hauled him aboard. He was wet and shivering. Celia hugged him. It's a miracle. You're alive. Shanks eyed her blearily. I'll take your word for it. They maneuvered him into the cabin, removed his wet clothes, and helped him onto a bunk. Shanks muttered, I'll be right as rain with 40 winks, and closed his eyes. Celia covered him carefully with a blanket and stayed beside him, while Flannery retreated outside, wondering why he was thinking, two's company, three's a crowd. He dismissed the thought as unworthy and concentrated on identifying some landmark through the mist. He took out his logbook and noted the 4 bridges on the Bywater that made this part of the city an island: O'Dwyer's, Abbey, Ball's, and Matthews. Visibility is still hopeless, he decided, too risky to proceed, and he passed the time seeing elephants swirling in the mist. Celia came out with a cup of tea. He's sleeping like a baby. He's a tough old goat. I wonder how he'd do it. How did he do it? I'm sure he'd tell us in every boring detail, yes. Celia nudged him affectionately, put her arm through his. A father figure is not always a bad thing, is it? For both of us. He investigated the rail at which Shanks had arrived, found it loaded with tins of food and 2 10-gallon cans, one with water, the other with petrol. Having transferred the new supplies into the Ark, which is the name of the sailboat they liberated, they sat side by side waiting for the sun to arrive and burn off the mist. It was strange not to hear traffic, as if the city was still sleeping. There was only the slap of the current in this narrow passage. When the mist dissipated a little, the buildings emerged as pastel pink mirages on the water. He looked around for the first bridge, O'Dwyer's, and he swore. It was almost completely underwater, only the parapet showing. Shit! I should have remembered it's near the equinox, which means higher tides. I looked out. He was despondent. There's umpteen bridges ahead, probably all submerged. I don't even know how low the neap tide would get, and won't be here for another 12 hours, and then it'll be too dark. I'm sure you'll keep it away. They pondered the situation until she piped up. Why must we go under the bridges? He looked at her as if she were a simpleton. You mean get wings, fly over them? If the water is the height of the parapet, it means there's water covering the streets beyond. Maybe a meter of it. Would that be enough? Could we just bypass the bridges? Flannery studied both sides of the bridge, then grinned at her. You're a lateral thinker, and I love you. It'll be dodgy, but worth trying.
No, okay. All right. I'm still with you. Thank you very much, Bob Quinn, who gave us all a salutary but wry smile regarding the water line. It's closer than you think, brethren. Anyway, in the midst of all this excitement, I omitted to give a little promo for Stanzas, and I'll do it now. Stanzas are a group of emerging writers dedicated to expressing themselves, developing their craft, and meeting interesting, like-minded people. Their monthly get-together takes place the 3rd Friday of every month at Hook and Ladder, Sarsfield Street, Limerick. There's a lot of gremlins in the shop tonight, folks. So our second situation from Stanzas is provided by Ileana Culling.
Hello. So, like Paul, I was asked to write 2 poems based on films that Richard Harris was in. So the first film is called Silent Tongue. Silent Tongue is a Western that was released in 1993. I wasn't born then because I'm one of those annoying millennials that everybody hates. But in that film, Richard Harris plays the role of Prescott Rowe. And the title made me think, so the title of Silent Tongue made me think of just how difficult it is to say the right thing sometimes, and how often our words betray us. And I imagined, kind of like Paul did, somebody who is fighting a battle against themselves and a battle against their own words. And I wrote this short poem. I want to taste the rust, bitterness and blood, bite down on this iron tongue, but my teeth might break. And I've had that same dream again where they fall out, turn from pearl to chalk to dust. The grains collect in crevices of palms. If teeth collided with my tongue, the force would shatter them at once. I would be left with only broken porcelain. And if I could, I'd rip it from its roots, let the blood pool. Instead, I remain mute. What would it say if it could speak? An utterance in an empty room. I think that it will end my life, and that it might be soon. Thank you. The second poem is titled This is the Sea, and when I read that title, the first thing that came to mind was the view of the Atlantic that you can see from the cliffs of Moher. I was there a few weeks ago with visitors from Canada, and it's the kind of place where you just have to sort of sit and take in the view. And if you've been there, I'm sure you'll agree with me. And a few days after my Canadian friends left, a man died at the cliffs in a tragic accident. And after hearing about that, especially given how recently I was there, I decided to do a little bit of research about deaths at the cliffs of Moher and its sort of tragic history. Because it's such a beautiful place, but it's also such a dangerous place. And to borrow a quote from Sylvia Plath, I think it's something beautiful but annihilating. So when I was reading about lives that had been lost there, one story in particular stayed with me. 10 years ago, in January 2007, a woman from Cork named Eileen Murphy jumped from the cliffs, and she held her infant son, Evan, in her arms as she jumped. Nobody suspected that it would happen. Nobody saw any warning signs. And I wrote this poem because I couldn't stop thinking about that. She was a young single mother in a country where young single mothers aren't given the supports that they need. And this wasn't the 1950s or 60s, this was 10 years ago. This poem is titled This is the Sea. Far below, the ocean throws itself against cliff face, and from this space, transitional, I overlook the resting place of souls, known and unknown. The hush of waves whispers to me, wraps its soft tongue around my feet. From where I stand, I could not be any more alone. I speak your name to the open air. It lingers there, a soft echo. If I could pull you up, lifeless and cold, I would, I know. I picture you, barefoot, where you once stood, last stood, ice in your bones, holding your only love in arms that shook from fear and January cold. With soft embrace I never gave, consumed both you and part of me. This is the sea. I ask of it to take me to where I should be. To take me to take me, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iliana Cooley. Gerry Stembridge is a Limerick writer, director and actor. He was educated at CBS Sexton Street in Limerick. He reached significant prominence in Ireland when he co-created a satirical comedy radio programme, Scrap Saturday with Dermot Morgan. It became one of the most popular programmes on RTE radio. Stembridge wrote the screenplay for Ordinarily Decent Criminal, which starred Kevin Spacey and Linda Fiorentino. He co-wrote Nora, a film about James Joyce and Nora Barnacle, which starred Ewan McGregor and Susan Lynch. He has directed such films as Guilt Trip, Black Day at Black Rock, Alarm and About Avon. Stembridge's latest novel, The Effect of Horror, was published in 2013. He is also the author of 3 earlier novels, Unspoken, Wall Street Press, Counting Down and According to Luke 4, both Penguin Ireland. Gerry Stembridge.
I'm a bit curious about the Gerry's. That isn't how I refer to it. You know, just one of them will do. One of them will do. Or as it was in Limerick when I was growing up, George Stembridge. That was all. It was always a chap. It was never. So it's gone through a number of variations. I'm going to take this off. So it's a bit warm up here. I also forgot my reading glasses, so I hope the raw eyes will be good enough. As you mentioned, two of the novels, which I'm going to read two pieces. After I finish the first one, of course, you can howl and rage, and I won't bother to read the second. But on we go. But I've chosen the two pieces for one reason only, is that Richard Harris features in both of them. In one of them, he would have what you might call a leading role. And in the second passage, he has it's very much a cameo appearance. And what? What are the odds that your glasses would fit my... You must be joking me. Hold on a second. If this is a miracle, if this works. No, it's worse. But thank you.
Must have like that in rehearsal, Gerry.
Anyway, now we all know that in real life, Richard Harris would never accept a cameo role in anything. But that's one of the great things about being a writer. You can just decide to put him in and be he has a cameo role. So that's that. Now, the two books are interconnected. The first one is Unspoken. The second one, The Effect of Her, and essentially they follow a group of children who were born at the beginning of the first one in 1959, and the book, if you like, tells they're born in Limerick in 1959. The book tells their story right through the decade of the 60s, and then the second book takes them right through the decade of the 70s, up to more or less the time they're about to be 21, the traditional entry into adulthood. The dates are also, however, significant, not that it particularly matters for my reading today, but just to say the dates are also significant because on the date they were born, I chose the date on which Eamon de Valera stops being Taoiseach of the country and Sean Lemass becomes Taoiseach of the country, which is often regarded as the beginnings of what we laughingly call modern Ireland. And the conclusion of the book, say 21 years later, is at the end of 1979, and it is at that time that Charles J. Haughey becomes Taoiseach of Ireland. So it was a very neat, for me, it was a very neat thing to follow those two. So that just gives the context for this. So let's go to Limerick, September 1966. One of the young characters in it, Francis, is 7 at this stage, and his brother Gussie, who is significant in this section, is 16, 17. Gussie, on the flat of his back, mouth open, let out a big snort and turned to the wall, pulling the blankets with him. He had told Francis he might bring him to see the heroes of Telmark this afternoon. Gussie was really looking forward to seeing the film because Richard Harris was in it. And he had met Richard Harris for real. One day, ages ago, he came home from work, all excited, saying, "Guess who sat himself at the bar in the departure lounge all on his own because his flight to New York was delayed?" No one knew. "Richard Harris," Gussie said. And I served him, and he started talking to me. He asked how life was in the old town these days, and he said he'd love to get home more often. He'd been off in Norway making a new film. Until Gussie said film, Francis didn't know who Richard Harris was. Now he wondered if he'd ever seen him in a film. From New York, he's flying straight to Hawaii to make another film. He said to me it's called Hawaii, funnily enough. Gussie laughed. He said it was a tough life, but someone had to do it. Gussie laughed again. You know the way he looks big on screen? Well, sitting at the bar right in front of me, he looked huge, powerful. Something about him, all right. He really stands out. Even if you've never seen him in any of his films, you'd know there was something special about him. He was as nice as that and real ordinary, you know? Francis had never seen Gussie so excited. Ever since he started working in the bar in Shannon Airport, he often talked about famous people who flew in from America, but he had never spoken to any of them. And from the things Gussie said about them, none of them sounded very nice. But Richard Harris seemed to be different. Even though he was stuck there for 3 hours waiting for his flight, he never complained once. He just got friendlier. And he wanted Gussie to serve him all the time. Vodka he drank. After Gussie served him a few times, he said, just give me the bottle for Jesus' sake. And Gussie knew that Ollie, the head barman, couldn't give out to him for letting him have the bottle, because he was Richard Harris.
Then he poured himself a big glass and asked Gussie loads of questions about himself. And even though Ollie was always telling the trainee barman to keep their distance and not bother the customers, Gussie knew it was all right to talk because Richard Harris wanted him to, so he did. What Gussie, despite frequent repetitions of the story, never told anyone, not his friends, not his workmates, nor family, nobody, was how after many jokes and anecdotes, Richard Harris asked for a second glass to be put on the bar counter. And he poured a reckless measure into it and he asked, "Am I right, my friend Gussie, in thinking you're an Augustine, not an Angus?" Gussie, who'd always been embarrassed at his name, just nodded, expecting to be teased. But Richard Harris's blue eyes looked kind as he said, "Remarkable man, your namesake, profound philosopher, and the author of a prayer that every poor benighted Irishman should commit to memory and murmur at every available opportunity." You know what the prayer is? Do you know what your namesake famously begged of God? Because he hadn't a clue. He shook his head, and Richard Harris just stared at him for a long time before he spoke. "God make me good, but not yet." How about that, huh? Then he smiled, lifted his glass, and pushed the other one towards Gussie. "So a toast, young Augustine." "Never mind that old fucker." Seeing Gussie look towards Ollie, who was spying on him at the far end of the bar. "Do your own thing. Never be afraid to do your own thing. Pick it up there. Join me in a toast. God make me good, but not yet." As Richard Harris swallowed, Gussie decided he'd better knock his back, and the burn inside him made his eyes water, even as Richard Harris's laser blues fixed on him like a brother, and his laugh was cracked and warm and full. To be enfolded in such giant charisma was more intoxicating than the vodka. But Francis and the rest of the family only heard about the huge tip placed casually on the counter when Richard Harris's flight was finally called. Francis still remembered how Gussie had taken the folded up note from his pocket as he came to that part of the story and opened it slowly to show them. £20. Imagine growing up around here and ending up a huge Hollywood star. Since that day, any time Richard Harris's name was spoken, Gussie always said those same words. Imagine growing up around here and ending up a huge Hollywood star. No wonder his big brother was dying to see the heroes of Telemark. Today was his first day off since it came to the Savoy. He would definitely go this afternoon, and maybe he really would bring Francis with him. Sometimes Gussie said he'd do things and then he'd change his mind or just forget to do the thing he said. But Francis never really minded that, because then Gussie all of a sudden would do a really nice thing and it'd be a brilliant surprise. Like one day a long time ago, when Francis was much smaller and Gussie was still going to school, he came flying up the road on his bike and without telling Mam or anyone, just grabbed Francis, lifted him onto the bar of the bike and carried him off. He wouldn't even say where they were going. Next thing, they arrived at Sarsfield Barracks. There were hundreds there, all pushing up against the railing, staring into the barracks field. Gussie hoisted Francis onto his shoulders, and then he saw the most surprising thing. A crashed plane. It was huge, nearly half the size of the field. It was tipped over on its side with one wing broken and the other wing up in the air. There were soldiers and Gardaí all around it. Actually, that, Gussie said, it's a constellation. The pilot had to crash land. It's a miracle it didn't blow up. Francis didn't know why Gussie had cycled home to collect him to bring him to see this. But he was delighted he had. His two brothers were so big now their bed looked tiny. 2 lumps, his man called them. Francis was glad she'd saved up and got bunks for him and Martin. He was even better than having his own bed because he was so high up. From underneath, he heard a moan. And then Martin went completely quiet. Had he woken up out of his nightmare? Francis wanted to see, but he knew if he peeked over and Martin was awake, he'd say something, and then Francis would answer back, and then Martin would start kicking him from underneath, and then Francis would throw something down at him, and then it would turn into a real fight. But Francis didn't want anything to happen today that would get him into trouble. His mum was allowing him to go to the library this morning for the first time on his own, which he really wanted to do because he was hoping to borrow the book that Ian Barry had shown him. Ian Barry's book wasn't from a library, it was his own. He said his daddy bought it for him in Dublin. Francis had never known anyone who called his father Daddy. He'd heard English children say it on television all right, but Ian Barry definitely wasn't English. He sounded like all the other boys, which was surprising because Ian Barry looked so different from everyone else with his yellow cardigan and his funny tartan pants. If everything worked out for Francis today, then first, he'd see Richie winning his football match. Second, he'd find the book he was looking for in the library. And third, Gussie would bring him to see the heroes of Telemark. He'd never be lucky to do all three things, though. On to 1971. Actually, partly, I mean, it really was because of Richard, but I also partly chose this because it's about something that was happening then, which is more or less happening now, with very little difference, as you would say. With the briefest appearance from Richard Harris's time. Francis, in the back room with his mum and dad, was watching, sorry, just to say Francis would be 12. Francis, in the back room with his mum and dad, was watching the Late Late Show and reading his library book, When 8 Bells Toll, at the same time. At first, the book got more of his attention, as it seemed much more exciting than a crowd of women on the Late Late complaining about their rights. As soon as Gay Byrne said at the start of the programme that tonight he was going to hand the show over to the women of Ireland, Francis was disappointed, knowing that meant there wouldn't be any famous singers on, or actors telling funny stories, like Richard Harris, who'd been a guest a few weeks before. He told Gay Byrne that when he went to Hollywood first, the film studio put him up in a big fancy hotel in Beverly Hills, and he couldn't believe the prices on the breakfast menu, $1 for one boiled egg. Francis' mum had gasped when she'd heard that. Richard Harris said he noticed that 2 boiled eggs cost $1.50. So he told the waiter he wanted to order the second boiled egg. Gay Byrne nearly fell off his chair, he laughed so much at that. But tonight, there were no funny stories, just given out. Francis wasn't even half listening at first because assassins had arrived to murder Philip Calvert, and he'd coolly dispatched 2 of them. When he told Charlotte he was sorry he hadn't finished off the 3rd assassin, she was angry at his sardonic sang-froid, but then realised that Philip Calvert was only doing what any man would do to protect him, so she apologised. Francis heard one of the women say, "Under Irish law, married women are little more than chattels of their husbands." He liked the sound of the word, chattels. From the way the woman was talking, it meant prisoner or servant. Francis wondered what his dad would think of that, considering he brought his mum tea and toast in bed every morning before going to work, and his mum was always telling him what to do. He went back to his book, but the women in the audience were having their say now, and there was a lot more shouting over each other, so he kept getting distracted. One woman said that the most important thing was that the children's allowance should be in the mother's name, not the father's. And another woman said, "Yes, I agree, but," and then said something completely different about widows inheriting their husband's property. Another woman interrupted her and said she agreed with the first woman, but the real disgrace was the raw deal unmarried mothers got. Once Francis began to realise that there might be a row on the Late Late, he stopped reading his Alistair MacLean novel altogether. A woman who said her name was Mags Perry got a huge round of applause for saying that the most important issue was the free availability of contraception. Until women had control over their own bodies, there would never be equality. Loads of women in the audience cheered at that, and someone else shouted out that women weren't going to be baby-making machines anymore. Contraception. Francis had never heard of it before. How can you read your book and watch TV at the same time? Why was his dad asking him that all of a sudden? It was easy, he often did it. Well, I just can. Wouldn't you be better off reading upstairs? Contraception. Francis guessed the word had something to do with having babies. Anyway, it's near your bedtime. You'll be able to concentrate better if you read upstairs. I really wished his dad would shut up and let him hear what the women were saying. He was distracting his mum too. Fancy, I can't hear the programme properly with you talking. I'm just saying he should take his book up to his bedroom. I don't care what he does with his book. I just want to watch the late in peace. I'm after listening now what that young one Nell is after said. I like her, she's not afraid of anyone. His dad now stood in front of him. Francis couldn't even see the telly. Right, you heard what Mam said, off to bed with you. Francis was raging that his dad was stopping him from enjoying the brilliant shouting match on the telly. Why was it suddenly annoying him so much that he was able to read a book and watch the late at the same time? Do what you're told. You can read in peace in your bedroom. Come on now, off it you. Just then the ads came on. Francis knew his dad wouldn't stop going on at him. All right. He slammed his book as he got up and walked out, making a sighing sound to show how stupid he thought his dad was being. After he'd gone, Anne looked at Fancy. Why be at him? He was sitting there grand and quiet for once. I didn't think he should be listening to all that. Anne wasn't sure what Fancy meant by all that, but she wasn't bothered enough to ask. As long as she could watch the row and the late in peace, she was happy.
Your guys can still do it, huh? How about?
Thank you very much, Gerry Stembridge. And now the final spasm of syncopation from the mysterious Mr. Valentine.
Final spasm. It's very interesting.
I picked it up in Bavaria.
See.
Like the beat, beat, beat of the tom-tom and the jungle shadows fall. Like the tick, tick, tock of the stately clock as it stands against the wall. Like the drip, drip, drip of the raindrops when the summer showers through. So a voice within me keeps repeating you, 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 night and day. You are the one, only you beneath the moon and under the sun. Whether near to me or far, it's no matter, darling, where you are. I think of you, night and day, day and night. Why is it so? There's no such a hungry yearning burning inside of me, and it's charming to warm me through till you let me spend my life making love to you, day and night, like the beat, 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 like the tick, tick, tock, like the drip, drip, drip. So a voice within me keeps repeating you, you, you.
Rory Keane and Bridget Burhen from the Mysterious Mr Valentine, Stanzas and Brooklyn Bond.
Hello. So the two films that I decided to write about were Echoes of a Summer and Your Ticket Is No Longer Valid. I had a poem for Your Ticket Is No Longer Valid, and I was reading it over and over again for the past hour, and it didn't feel right at all. So I rewrote a completely different one in the last 5 minutes. But I prefer it a lot more. Your Ticket, just if anyone hasn't seen it, it's a Canadian film. It was made in, I think, 1981. It's basically about a businessman. Played by Richard Harris. He has a younger girlfriend, and he basically struggles to perform in bed. So this is the new Your Ticket Is No Longer Valid. I miss being able to self-destruct. It was fun pushing buttons in the dark with you. Alone, I notice things that scare me. Like all those secret messages I see in books by other men. There's a woman behind my spot on the curb. We both know how to feel useless. Only one of us is useless. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mysterious Mr Valentine. And now, without the aid of a safety net, Bob Quinn and Gerry Stembridge will talk, hopefully for a while. Thank you.
I'm the straight man.
We generally weren't informed what it was. I presume they assumed put these two together and they will talk, and we will take questions. That's always a clever way. But can I say, and you might want to add into this, can I say first of all, as somebody who grew up in Limerick, as you might in the 70s, I am delighted that there is such a thing as stanzas happening. It makes me somewhat envious that back in those dark and dismal days, if it existed, I certainly knew nothing about it. And in fact, one of the big impetus for me I didn't dislike growing up in Limerick. I didn't have horrors about it. It was a perfectly nice place to grow up in, but I was very anxious to leave after my leaving cert and go on to college, because I assumed that is where I would find the kind of world that I was looking for, the kind of people that I was looking for. And my guess is that there were lots of us in Limerick, but we simply weren't finding each other, and we were in those far off, not only pre-Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, blah 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 generation, but actually in my case and in the case of most of my friends, we didn't even have phones in the house, let alone mobile phones. Anyways, all of which makes it sound like it was an awful, a weird and strange place to live in. But anyway, what I want to say is, first of all, congratulations on the work I've heard. But I'm delighted to know it's happening. I'm delighted to know because one of the things I think about my generation, I can't. Obviously, Bob is 104, so that's a lot more than. I can't talk to his generation at all. In fact, In fact, what you are to me, can I just say, what you're probably seeming to me is what I am to Bob, really. I just move that through. But, and so,
He still has his hair anyway.
exactly. So he will be able to talk to you about a truly dark and dreary time. You know, whereas actually what's interesting is what I would describe as the 70s is that everything that is sort of open and discussed and out there now was present for those of us who were teenagers in the 70s, but in an entirely parallel culture, which if you were lucky enough to find it, you worked your way happily through it. And I was delighted this morning to see a table set up right in the centre of the city with a bunch of young people looking for signatures for supporting repeal of the 8th. And such a thing would have been entirely unknown in terms of the openness of it myself. But as you saw from the piece I read, in 1971, that world was already being talked about. And in fact, even your time in RT, and that's where you were in RT throughout the 60s, and that must have been a kind of bubble of liberal life.
It was paradise.
Let's talk to us a little bit about RT in the 60s. How different it was from Limerick in the 60s.
Well, I didn't know Limerick in the 60s at all.
You can guess though.
In fact, I didn't know there was anything outside Dublin in the 60s. That's why I kept on emigrating to find places outside Ireland. I emigrated from Ireland when I was 21, and I didn't intend to come back, but I did come back. Got stuck in RTE for 7, 8, 9 years, and walked out of that as well.
Were you there from the very beginning?
I was a trainee sound operator in 1961, and the station opened in January 1962. So I was there. I was one of the founders of RTE, and I regretted every day of my life, every time I listened to RTE or watch RTE, for the 5 seconds before I switched off. I regret that I had anything to do with it.
Really?
Yes, I do. I think it's a disastrous decision by Lemass and Whittaker to turn it into a semi-commercial broadcaster. And it couldn't win because it had the BBC to compete with, where there is very good commercial-free broadcasting, and RTE is unfortunately, very sadly, dreadful.
So we won't get into a big power about this because, but in a way, I suppose what I was asking you there was not so much actually that sort of. You immediately move to a larger philosophical question about commercial or semi-commercial.
Yeah.
What I was really talking about was the reality of the life you lived, of the people you knew, of the attitudes they had back in. Because there is the tendency for us now to think. Speak up. Okay, so I always think my voice is plenty loud enough for. I'm great, but he's a bit quiet. Yeah, I know. He's a bit deaf. But that because
you know all about the personalities in RTE, and I don't. I had nothing to do with the personalities of RTE except to direct Dave Byrne. He was somebody down there, and I just directed this show. And I directed most of the shows there. Paddy Crosby's School around the corner. I was just up there somewhere in the box directing. I didn't socialise with these people at all.
Oh, did you not?
Not at all.
So
not at all.
You lived a hermit-like existence.
No, I spent most of my time in pubs with the rest of the
yes,
society.
all right, okay.
In fact,
so was it a very liberal milieu?
I wouldn't say that.
All
no,
right, okay.
I was once. I spent about a year as a producer of religious programs, believe it or not, and I was an agnostic. And I remember one day I was directing the mass. I directed the mass, and the priest came up to me and he said, "You know, when I hold the host up, should I face the camera or should I look away?" And I had to say to him, "Look, what are you here to do?" And he said, "To say the mass." And I said, "Yes, well, you stick to saying the mass, and I'll stick to the cameras, you know." But I just, before we talk about RT, which I find boring.
Yeah, no, we'll move on.
Years ago.
No, I really just wanted to know you having a wild time there. I was looking for gossip.
No,
all right,
gossip.
I'll go on then.
Any gossip there was. There was one man, actually, I heard a phrase there called moral turpitude. I don't know whether you've ever heard of that, but moral turpitude is the only sin for which you can, or crime, for which you can be sacked from the civil service. And there was one soundman colleague of mine who was always bragging about his conquests. And one day he got one of the makeup girls in the dressing room, and he was sacked for the moral turpitude that he committed. But can I just say one thing? Because I wanted to say to Richard's, I don't know, are you his son or his friend? Yeah. But I mentioned to you that I had one meeting with Richard Harris, whom I admired greatly. As I said, I loved his films and I loved his sporting life. But I was directing a show called On the Road once for RTE, an outside broadcast. And in the Great Southern Hotel in Galway, the researcher came up to me and said, Richard Harris is here, Richard Harris is here. I said, get him on the show. She said, he won't go. So I went and found Richard Harris and I said, please, just sit in the audience. I just want to take a shot of you in the audience. Because he had nothing better to do. He was with his wife in the Great Southern. I think he was on the Dry at the time. And so he was sat in the audience and I immediately, I said, no, I won't ask you anything. I never trust a television producer. We're liars and deceivers. Never trust us, because I said to him, won't say anything, I just want to take a shot of you in the audience. He came in and I immediately went to Bart Bastable, who was the interlocutor, and said to him, Richard Harris is in the audience, ask him one of the questions. And he did, and it was about Irish, which Richard had absolutely no interest and certainly no fluency in it, you know, and he was left mumbling because somebody had not given him his lines. An actor can't talk without his lines unless they're telling the story.
And did you take pleasure in that?
No, I felt very
that
guilty.
Poor humiliation.
I felt very guilty about that all my life. And
You could talk, but you had to be in the pub.
Yes, that's right.
Where he would open up.
Yeah. I thought he was a fine man. I heard him giving a shite about Frank McCourt, his book on Limerick, and I heard him on the radio, and I was amazed at the anger that he showed at Frank McCourt letting down Limerick. Even though I think I never read the book, never saw the film.
I have to say, who fired the first salvo was Frank McCourt, because he had mentioned that Richard Harris was a drunk. He fired the first salvo. I have to speak up.
Well, certainly Richard Harris gave him what for on the radio.
Richard was very quiet about the whole thing until they started. Can I just say, on a hangers on, I would say.
Yes.
Can I just say, on a far more trivial level, even though what I read from is as clearly signalled, is a novel and is therefore made up, but insofar as memory is ever correct or whatever, the egg joke is true. That it was, if you'll pardon the pun, a joke he cracked on the Late Late Show, on the Late Late Show, sometime that I heard that just that you carry something as a child or as a very young person, and that he told that story.
He might have been talking about Jack Benny or somebody. He might have counted it
as a kind of mean, as a kind of thing. Yeah. But no, I think he would also have been playing into that Irish sensibility,
and gay like people who jump.
You just don't spend outrageous amount of money on things like an egg, you know what I mean? But anyway, and he was very well attuned to that. I want to one thing I do want to ask is, we're talking about actors, and that you were lucky in the 1980s. No, was it the 70s actually? No, 70s. In, for example, my own personal favourite of your films, Poteen, to have 3 actors of extraordinary ability.
The best.
The absolute best, but not just the best in the country, but that you sort of wonder if it was now, where would they be? Was it? So, but anyway, just to say, Cyril Cusack, Donald McCann, and Neil Tobin.
I must tell you how I got them.
Yes,
Donald McCann was a drinking companion of mine. He was the greatest actor. He was the greatest actor I'd ever seen on stage or in film. Even when I for Richard Harris, Donald was the best actor I ever saw. But we were drinking companions, and we used to talk about these things, and I asked him would he be in the first Irish language film, or feature film, or drama film in the Irish language. And he said, sure, yeah, Dublin have not much Irish, but I can learn the lines, And he said, you should ask Tobin, he has Irish. So I went to Tobin and I said, Donald McCann is willing to appear in this film, and Tobin said, if McCann is in it, I'll be in it. And then I got even braver.
We mustn't make assumptions. Has everybody here heard of Donald McCann and Neil Tobin?
Of course, these young people.
Of the 70s, they were, they really were the finest actors around.
I think times were fallow in the acting industry in the 70s. In fact, everything was fallow in the 70s. So there were 2 advantages. There was nothing going for actors, really. And also everybody was poor. and there was very little filming going on as well, except in television. But so Toby had said to me, "Why don't you try Cusack?" I said, "Cusack wouldn't look at me." You know, he said, "Try him." And I went to Cusack and I said, "There's this script," and Toby had said, "He's an Irish Gaelior. He speaks Irish." You know, and I said, "I didn't know that." So I went to him. I'd never met him before, and his flat in Hatch Street. And I said, "I have this little film, a small part in it. I wonder would you be interested in it?" He said, "Yes, maybe." And he read the script and he came back to me and said, yes, I'll do it. Yes, it's a very nice little film. So the three of them came, and it was very interesting because Donal had something to do with Cusack's daughter, beautiful daughter, another actress. And when she was very young, and he never forgave McCann, Cusack had also met Toby in an airport lounge, and said, "Oh, are you still a comedian?" It was shocking to me to say, because Toby was magnificent. So there were these three people, and they hated each other. Well, Toby and McCann liked each other, and they played Scrabble, and Neil kept Donal away from the drink by playing Scrabble with him every night, and Cusack stood aloof from all of them. And one day he said to me, "I'm very tired of living in this hotel. I wonder could I dine with you some night?" And I said to the wife, "Cusack wants to have dinner with us." And she said, "Great, what do we give him?" And I said to Cusack, "What kind of food do you like?" And he said, "I'd like 2 boiled eggs." And that's all he ate. Anyway.
Those connections. I mean, would I be right to think, to put it in context, would you be talking about, I mean, they're too old now, but if you had Neeson, Gabriel Byrne and Colin Farrell or something like that, that's in terms of modern, but to ask you, how do you rate, not just the actors, but the actresses as well, how do you rate that modern generation compared to those people that you worked with? Because sadly I never had a chance to work with myself.
Well, I never saw Gabriel Byrne on stage. I've seen him in many films, and he's a superb film actor. He's a film actor.
Okay, so you would rate him with McCann, we'll say, or something.
Stephen Ray is terrific. Brendan Gleeson is...
Oh, yes, jeez, there's so many now.
There's so many. There's so many actors now, and so many people making films, mainly in America, so American films, usually.
Well, that's... they have...
I mean, the Irish film industry is American now, because the object is to get your film into Middle America. The irony, of course, is that Americans make films for children now. Spend millions on films for children of 20. Children, I think, 20-year-olds are children. And I asked a senior man in Columbia Pictures once, who was at the Galway Film Festival, who's since dead, and I said to him, "It's terrible, you know, they're making films for 20 to 25-year-olds. He said, no, they're making films for 15-year-olds.
Absolutely.
I rarely see films except old black and white films on YouTube, but occasionally I go into the Omniplex in Galway if I see something that's interesting. And recently, maybe once a month, I used to do it. I don't do it anymore. But recently I've seen 2 films. I went to 2 films at the Omniplex in Galway. One was called Moher, and I never saw such a load of crap in my life until I saw the next one, which was the runner-up to the second remake of Blade Runner. I stuck that for half an hour.
The most recent remake of Blade Runner, okay, right. Okay.
I stuck it for
and did you like the original?
Oh, yes.
Oh, you did like the original?
I did.
Right.
Philip K. Dick. Wonderful science fiction writer.
Yeah, but it doesn't follow that the film necessarily was. So, so what was the difference between the two? Because the other was clearly I haven't seen it yet, but I know it's a homage to the earlier one. So why is one brilliant and the other rubbish?
Well, the first one was actually the story by Philip K. Dick, and he was the greatest science fiction writer. And I like science fiction. The second one was a cashing in on the reputation of Blade Runner, and it was ridiculous.
Okay.
There was no story. You know, ridiculous. And just meaningful looks. You know,
So
French film,
but French films are good.
But you see, you do have, I mean, because you tend to, but in terms of...
Syracuse told me that he paid in tax every week as much as I paid him, which was £120 a week.
Yeah, because he's filmed
he was paid that in tax, they said. You know, he was very big.
But when you look at what they often had to do just to get through to get through the year, working in theatre, or maybe the odd bit of TV, maybe that was the thing.
I think it made them better actors working on stage.
But you know, are modern day movie stars not entitled to reap the benefits of those? And they're still good actors.
No, but they're some very good. I mean, my all-time great actor was Jack Nicholson.
Which yes, he is.
He was the greatest I've ever seen.
He still is. He's still alive.
But he's not acting anymore. But that's enough about
that's enough about that.
Enough about me.
That's
what about you?
That's right. Okay, have you any questions for us? Now that you have a flavour of the sort of things that do or do not interest us. Nobody. Aha! Hero. I knew somebody would ask me about Scrap Saturday. If RT in the 60s bores you, what do you want me to know about it? Here's the thing I believe about success or failure is that, a bit like the old joke about comedy, it is always about timing, always about something happening at a particular time, in a particular situation, to a person. So one of the things I would say is that two things came together, and just in a stroke of luck. Dermot had been had created a pretty successful name for himself. Had done a lot of stuff on TV. Was a national figure at that time. But he was a national figure who had recently had a fairly decisive failure. He'd had a TV programme. He'd risen to the level of getting his own TV series, and it hadn't worked out. And not only had it not worked out, but a lot of people in RTE just couldn't bear the thought of ever working with him again because of that. So in other words, he was in a situation where he didn't know what was going to happen to him next. Meanwhile, I was kind of a nobody in the sense that nobody in the larger Irish public knew who I was. I was actually, I had just left RTE. I'd been working in RTE. Like Bob, I left more quietly, but I'd left around the start of the end of 1988, 89 rather. Sorry, I was only there 5 years, kind of the late 80s, from 85 to 90.
So you were unscathed.
Yeah. I mean, we won't go into that for now, but just was. So I had done odd comedy. I've done a bit of kind of comedy, sketchy stuff in young people's programs in RTE is Bob might testify. It's actually the best place to work in RTE because nobody bothers you, and you can really let your imagination run riot. You can have lots of fun and all the rest of it. So I'd managed to. Anyway, Dermot had happened to see a couple of things along the way. So we had never met, but he contacted me and came to, and basically. Well, he sort of lied to me, I would have to say. Although maybe in fairness he didn't know he was lying to me. The truth was, he said, "Look, I have this radio thing that I've been commissioned to do 8 episodes on the radio side." And he really sold it heavily. And this is what I was thinking is the lovely sort of is that he told me the country is crying out for this. They really need to sort of, they're going to go mad for it. It's going to be blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting there listening and going, yeah, sure, yeah, we've heard all this before. Where it's going to go. But of course, I liked the idea, and I actually liked Dermot's work, and I kind of wasn't aware that he was in a difficult situation because clearly he didn't tell me. Anyway, he said. The invitation was really to be one of the writing team. This is what he talked about when he met. So I said to him, absolutely, sure, yeah. And about a couple of weeks later, we arranged to meet, and it's me and him in a room. And he doesn't tell me why. He doesn't tell me that. And but basically, whoever else he asked said no. So we were left now. I don't need to tell the story to represent myself as a knight in shining armour. I just was the one that was there. It didn't bother me. In fact, I quite liked the idea of one was there. It meant more attention for me. No. Well, just the other thing, in the nature of Scrap Saturday, which was your voices, I was not a performer. I did the very occasional little bit of a voice that was needed, a generalised accent, that kind of thing. I never did any. No, Owen Rowe was the third. So we talked about who we might hire for it. I was great friends and had done a lot of theatre work with Pauline McLean, and he had seen her in action as well. So we very quickly agreed we should get Pauline in. And then Owen Rowe, I can't remember how Owen Rowe was, but I'm pretty sure it was Dermot thought of having Owen Rowe. And off we went. And it just transpired to be, it transpired to be that Dermot was right. And I still have no idea why, other than it was just the right time for it.
That was before Father Ted, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. Father Ted, if you like, came for Dermot, rising that. But it was just the right time. And also, actually, because there was only two of us, one of the things I always think about that is that there wasn't that kind of committee thing that might have people raising objection to this or raising. Do you know what I mean? That it ends up a big discussion and things get watered down and so on. So we just went for it, and the nastier the better was both our view as far as and it just came to pass. And the curious thing about it was that because it has this reputation of it was taken off the air because people were scared, but actually that ain't the case. In fact, I hate to have to say this where we are at the moment, but the only serious regular complaint came from Limerick Corporation.
Oh yeah.
That sounds like you're not that shocked at that at that news. And it was to do with, those of you who are old enough to remember that there was a festival on in Limerick at the time called that Treaty 300.
Oh yeah.
You remember the Treaty 300? And because the 300th anniversary of the Treaty of Limerick, and there were various events go on. So this, and I do actually take credit from this because I was the Limerick person, and also because it was a generic voice. It wasn't a known person. So I invented this very upbeat, kind of DJ type from Limerick local radio, who every week announced the greatest new events on City Red. And there was constant references to Golden Grill and constant references to one of the jokes that most offended them was because Perry Square, which we all know is a very elegant part of it, and this is genuine, there had been a complaint that week, it was manna from heaven for me, there had been a complaint that week that there was prostitution going on in Perry Square. I know. And the residents, anybody here living in Perry Square? Anyway, some of the residents of Perry Square had complained about prostitution and could anything be done about it. So that week I did a piece announcing, as part of Treaty 300, the annual Kick a Prostitute competition. It ended with because of and all remember everyone, Limerick. It's not Limerick. Limerick. You're a lady, not an old whore. And Limerick Corporation made an official complaint about this. So, but oddly enough, the larger political establishment did not.
Anybody complain about the phrase Stan City?
Well, can I also say? Here's my chance to nail, but I keep nailing it. I keep nailing this canard, we did not invent it. It existed, but we used it. Absolutely. They complained about that. But somehow it is because I remember when we first used it, and I forget actually whether I wrote it or whether it wrote. But I knew it because I knew it from my own family in Limerick. I knew it from people I knew in Limerick. I knew it that the phrase would be there. But I suppose I will have to say it is certainly true that it I won't say popularised it, but it brought it to a wider public, and it began to be used in a way. So we have to take the blame for that. But yes, for 4 or 5 weeks on the trot, there were complaints from Limerick Corporation, and you might have done it that in the way of RT doing these things, how it works, how the censorship regime works, or certainly worked when we were there, was the head of radio sidling up to us and said, "Lads, we got another complaint about Limerick." And we said, "Yeah, so what? Because it's You know, we haven't done anything illegal, we haven't done anything yet. Yeah, I know, but such a hassle having to get back to them all the time. Did he ease off a bit? And we said, there's a, it's just hassle, you know, it's just ease off a bit. And I will ask you, so all I want to say is, that to me represented so much of that kind of Irish thing of how an atmosphere of self-censorship works, is that you don't stand up to something when there's a complaint, if you believe, I mean if it's a legitimate complaint you carry through. Instead it's about, it's just too much trouble to do anything about it, and you ease off. But we didn't, so anyway.
Great listening to both of you, and all talking about the amount of problems like school and indeed your program last Saturday, which gave a good satirical reflection of what was happening in society at the time. Do you think RTE is doing anything like that? Would you think it's gone somewhat stagnant? It doesn't seem to reflect in any satirical fashion what's happening in society, and there's so much happening. Yeah.
Well, I haven't got a television, so anytime I see television programs, it's on my laptop. And one program I did watch recently, because I'd seen a couple of years ago there was a program called Republic of Telly, which I enjoyed. And there was one sequence in it, Bridget and Eamon, which I really enjoyed. I thought it was very good. And I looked at 2 episodes recently, and I said, that's horrible. Because they took it, it's like you're taking an elastic band, and if you pull it and hold it, and then it becomes perished. So RTE takes a little spot like that, which worked very well as a couple of minute spot, and turned it into a half hour. And they're reaching, you know. So that's a pity. It seems to me there's a lack of something there. But I should point out that I don't live in this country anymore. I live in Connemara and have done for the past 47 years. So all of these things are really academic to me. I am not interested in the country outside Connemara. I'm interested in Germany. I'm interested in Britain because one of my sons is a successful director there. Spain? Not interested in Catalonia whatsoever. The reason they're leaving is they're the richest province in Spain, and they're fed up supporting the rest of Spain. So they're being greedy. It's like another Katanga and back. The rich state wishes to secede from the general country. And I have no sympathy with Catalonia whatsoever.
I like that about Bob. He's not interested in it, but he's very strong views about it.
Only matched by my ignorance of the situation. But I do mean that. I've lived in a different country for the past 47 years, and we speak Irish every day. And
you speak Irish all the time?
Yeah, with my neighbours. They all speak Irish. I never speak English.
Did you have to learn it when you went there, as in learn it fluent? Obviously you had Irish.
I had Christian brothers Irish.
Yeah.
So when I went down there first, and I was staying in Cardiff, and I went into the pub one day, and Charles Mitchell was reading the news. And the barman, I didn't speak Irish properly at all. It was just school Irish. And I was just learning, but I wasn't intending to learn. I'm not a gay girl, by the way. I just happened to speak the language of the country in which I was, which was Connemara. But the barman came up to me, and he said, "What's he saying?" Because Charles Mitchell was reading the Irish version of the news. And Charles hadn't got a word of Irish. He was taught phonetically to say the news in Irish, because he was the English newsreader, and he had a Gate accent, and he wanted to emulate the British, and have somebody with a proper accent reading the news, an authoritative accent. So when it came to reading it in Irish, he sounded terrible, and the barman couldn't understand his Irish. I had to translate the Irish of Charles Mitchell to this barman, whose native language was Irish. And it's a very interesting situation, and I don't get into the politics of it at all. I live quietly. I've made a lot of films there, a lot of work there. Most of my work has been done there since I left television, and it's been very enjoyable and very satisfying. But it's a different country. Dublin is definitely different. I was born there, but it's a foreign country. I rarely go there. When I go there, I walk down O'Connell Street maybe once a year, and I hear 123 different languages and not a single Dublin accent there. It's an amazing transformation, and I welcome immigration. I think I'd like to see this country run by the Poles. We're the most efficient, practical, hard-working people I've ever met, next to Connemara people. I plant trees. and prune them, and put them down and chop them up and carve them into things, you know. But I'm getting a bit old to be using the big chainsaw, so I have a little chainsaw. Anyway, I knocked down 2 trees last week because a neighbour wanted 2 slices of logs, and we collected them to light a beautiful ring with them. But the 2 trees were very big. The pine tree about 30 feet high, and another one 40 feet high. And they were lying there, and I said, I have to chop them up, but I need to use my big chainsaw. And if I use my big chainsaw, I'm crippled for a couple of days. So I got my neighbour, Mikey, the leader, to come over. He came at 11 o'clock, and at 3 o'clock he had chopped up these 2 trees, huge trees, chopped them all up into little logs, you know, and without breaking sweat. These are amazing people. They can build their own houses, build their own boats. These are a unique community that I live among. I'm privileged to live among, and I resent leaving the place. To come down here is a great journey for me to visit a foreign country. And I don't mean Limerick, I mean Ireland outside Connemara. Terrible, I'm a chauvinist.
In terms of what it was, it seems to me that however ambitious for success we were 40 years ago, 30 years ago, in 50 even, it is now really just a very, it's almost just such a normal or ordinary part of a young person's growth that they are encouraged to be ambitious. They're encouraged. What you chose to do was, if you like, the very opposite of that. You abandoned that in favour of something else. And I think that have you noticed that change? And you wonder.
Yeah, I have. I would not like to be a young person trying to make films nowadays, because of the competition and the layers of bureaucracy that they have to.
Those of you who were fortunate to be here and still here, that was the start of the world tour. With the wind on their backs, they'll end up in Scrahan Town Hall for at least a week. Anyway, it's that too. It's wrap-up time. And the Richard Harris International Film Festival and the Limerick Centre, in association with Bearsmart 2017, brought you The Mysterious Mr Valentine, Stanzas, Gerry Stembridge, Bob Quinn, was there somebody else? And of course, Mr Bill O'Reilly with his personal stories about Dickie Harris, and so on and so forth. We'd like to thank the King John's Castle for providing the facilities. Thank you for the hall, thank you for the coffee. Treaty Brewery supplied the drink. Thank you, folks. Keep well. Rock on.